Hi, I'm Mike Dano with Light Reading, and we're here at the Mobile World Congress trade show in Las Vegas, the first time here in Las Vegas. And I'm here with Ishwar from AWS, and we're going to talk about all things cloud and hyperscaler. And so, Ishwar, you're here at Mobile World Congress, and you guys have a bunch of announcements this past week that sort of are happening all over the globe with all sorts of different customers. Maybe you can kind of just briefly walk us through, like, what is AWS talking about here at the show? What are the news things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so Mike, we are at an inflection point in the industry where the cloud is being adopted more and more by the telecom segment. And at this event, we are making a few announcements. First is just broadening the reach and usability of AWS for more use cases, more 5G components, and more partners. So with Rakuten Symphony, we are announcing that their platform, SimWorld, which is a telecom operations platform, is now running on AWS. So they made that announcement. With Parallel Wireless, which has the radio stack, an ORAN-compliant radio stack in 3G, 4G, and 5G networks, they're running that on AWS. And more specifically using EKS Anywhere, which is a variant of our managed Kubernetes platform for running third-party hardware, running on third-party hardware. So these were the two announcements in the space of 5G. We're also entering new spaces like satellite telecommunication networks. So with Sateliot, which is a company out of Spain that's building a satellite network out of LEO satellites, they are announcing that they are running their 5G narrow band IoT network using AWS. So they're using a packet core 5G and building a non-terrestrial network out of 5G technology, but using AWS. So these are some of the announcements that we made this time.
I mean, that's like, so you've got announcements with a Japanese-based company that's going global with their Open RAN stuff. You've got an announcement with a US vendor, Parallel Wireless. You have an announcement with a satellite company running through AWS. So I mean, right, that sort of just helps highlight the scale of Amazon Web Services, right? Like you've got all this stuff going on. It's all running through the cloud. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, is that
absolutely. Yeah, as I said, it's an inflection point, right? I think it took us a few years to really build the technology. I mean, the cloud was not ready for this 6 years ago, 7 years ago, right? I mean, these were applications that we had to understand and build capability in the cloud to really start being able to run these applications at the performance, at the scale, at the reliability required. And we are now at a point of maturity where not only have we early adopters, but we are seeing more and more use cases, more partners, and more components of the network now running on AWS.
Okay, so here's the big question, I think, for you here at this show. So, you know, we've talked about Rakuten and Parallel Wireless. AWS has a big agreement with Dish Network here in the US. But a lot of those companies are building new networks, including the satellite provider that you mentioned. That is essentially a new network that is being built using AWS. So my question for you, though, is, you know, can AWS also provide services to, you know, big, established, legacy, brownfield operators, the Verizons, AT&Ts, Vodafones? Are those also sort of targets for you guys? And if so, how are you going to target those kinds of customers, considering that their networks are, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, you know, right. They're very old.
Older than us, for sure.
Thankfully, at least something.
So, brownfield operators are different. You know, they have invested already in infrastructure. So they have to manage that sunk investment. They have established networks. They are building new networks, 5G networks, in a phased manner, you know, phasing out the old networks. Yeah. So definitely they're different, right? So for example, with Dish, we, as part of our solution, we have AWS services, but we also offer them local zones and direct connect backhaul because they didn't have these assets. Now, brownfield operators have those, so they don't need those from us. However, the learnings that we have from Dish and the technology we have for onboarding packet core and for radio stack is still applicable to brownfield networks. So we're using that. So in the past few months, we've made announcements with other brownfield operators. Swisscom is an example who is migrating their network to AWS. Their 5G SA core is going to be running on AWS. Telefonica Vivo Brazil is another one that is going to use Outpost for their 5G core. And then there's Spark New Zealand, which is kind of onboarded a 5G core. It's a Mavenir core onto AWS. So we're seeing brownfield operators getting comfortable with using the core. So there's quite a few engagements and traction in this area. But there are other areas and other services that we work with telcos with. An example is in the data analytics and AI ML space. So we have AI ML services like Transcribe, which translate voice to text, and then services like Comprehend, which do sentiment analysis. And telcos, brownfield telcos who have a large customer base, are using these services to reduce customer churn. They're using services like fraud detection, which is another machine learning service that we have to do roaming fraud detection. So there are other spaces besides networks that we are working on. Then there are classic enterprise workloads that they have, which are like any other enterprise customers moving to the cloud. We also have Wavelength, which is a mobile multi-edge computing platform where we have engagements with the likes of Verizon, Vodafone, South Korea Telecom, Bell Canada, and KDDI in Japan. So that footprint is also growing with telcos. So there are multiple ways we're doing, working with telcos, but in the network space also, brownfield operators are getting comfortable with adopting the cloud, but doing it in a little more phased manner, unlike Dish, which is kind of doing it all over.
Interesting. Okay, so really what you're saying is like for brownfield operators, you've got all these services and they can start to pick and choose some with the goal of potentially getting them to do more and more over time as they become comfortable running things in AWS.
Absolutely, and that's the success to transforming your business using the cloud, and that's what we saw in the enterprises over the last 15 years. It's phased, it's targeted, you do the low-hanging fruit first, you train people as you go along with this, go along this journey. And that's exactly what we're seeing with telcos in a compressed time frame.
Okay. All right. So you have successfully jumped through several, I think, difficult questions about, how is AWS going to target telecom operators, what services you guys provide, all the different announcements you have here. Like that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So here's the Olympic level question for you. Hopefully you can help me understand this. So one of the things you talked about was the AWS wavelength and local zones and sort of this idea of edge computing, where you would have not necessarily a data center like in a place like here in Las Vegas, but spread all over the country, all over the world, in all sorts of different locations, with the goal of lowering latency and having computing closer to the users that are using it. So my question for you is, how is AWS going to get to a point where that kind of distributed computing is actually running in all of these different places all over the world? Is there a scenario where you would run a mini edge computing data center in, super remote areas, tiny little towns like the town I'm from, which is Socorro, New Mexico? It's a city of basically 0 people and no one lives there, and it's, it's a very small city. So like, are places like that going to have edge computing infrastructure? Is AWS going to those places eventually, is my question.
Yeah, so AWS, as you rightly pointed out, started with regions. We had 4 large regions in the US. But we recognized and we heard from customers that there was a need for low latency, and in some cases, physically having the data close to a location or within a location, which is what led to local zones. Now, local zones are essentially AWS infrastructure, the same servers, same infrastructure that is in our regions, but this is close to metro centers, IT hubs, entertainment hubs, industrial hubs, and so forth. And these are data centers that we built, and we host our AWS infrastructure, and they run some of the same services that run in the regions. Now, the idea here is, as you rightly pointed out, getting the latency down, and also to some extent keeping the data in a physical location, which is required for some verticals and some applications. So we are basing this on customer demand and where there is a need for these applications in a significant number. So today we have 17 local zones in the US. We also have announced many more across the world. These are a super efficient way of getting into smaller geographies and smaller countries. If you look at the map, Europe map, there's like a lot of small countries, and a region doesn't make sense. A local zone makes more sense in a country like, say, Belgium, for example. But that's the intent, is to really bring computing or the cloud close to these locations. But it's driven primarily by demand and by population distribution so that we can target maximum population with that latency. So in the US, for example, the local zones we have 17, they now cover a large percentile of the population within certain latency, right? And that's the intent. That's what will drive it. Customer demand and reaching a certain percentile of the population within certain milliseconds.
So is it the case where once you reach a certain amount of demand, you'll open a new local zone in, wherever it is, and you would just increase the number of local zones based on the amount of traffic that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we've come to this point. So 2 years ago, we started with our first local zone, which was Los Angeles, and that was driven by the media industry there. There was a tremendous demand by the media industry, they do live production editing, and they wanted kind of AWS cloud close to them, and that's what led to the first local zone in Los Angeles. And then over time, we saw the demand grow in different parts of the country, and now we have 17 of them across the US. And it's just evolved, it continues.
Okay, and so can you say, like, by the end of next year, you would expect X number of local zones, or are you providing that kind of information?
Yeah, so we don't have a number on it. We have really compressed the time required to build a local zone. We can do that very fast now. So it's a matter of just knowing that there's demand, and we'll have a look. Yeah. Next MWC, you can check with me, and we might have one in Socorro, Mexico.
Yes, Socorro, New Mexico.
New Mexico.
That's the big goal. Okay, sounds good. Next Mobile World Congress, I'll come back to that question with you. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Thank you.